The National Assembly has passed a bill criminalising hate crimes and hate speech 5 years after it was introduced. There's been mixed reaction to the bill, with some opposition parties arguing it could actually limit freedom of speech. The Justice Department argues the bill ought to prevent these incidents from occurring across the country. For more on this, we're joined in studio by Justice Ministry Spokesperson Chrispin Phiri. Chrispin, thank you so much for joining us. So it's not quite law yet because the President still has to sign it off, but it's very nearly there. Currently, hate speech is, and you'll correct me if my definition is not quite there, it's a clear sign that you are intending to do harm or inciting to violence by what you say. Talk to me about the existing laws and how hate speech and how hate crimes are prosecuted and how things are going to change when this law is signed off by the President.
So currently, hate crimes in particular are not prosecuted because it's difficult to show specific intent that a crime was committed because someone is homophobic or because someone is racist. So there isn't that legal framework. And that's what this corrects. So now under this new law, if someone commits a crime and we're able to show that this crime is specifically motivated by hatred for a particular race or a particular group or religion, as the case may be, or any of the limited groups that you're not allowed to discriminate against, then one may be prosecuted for a hate crime.
Would it then, so let's say there's a murder and one is able to prove under this law that it was motivated by homophobia.
Yes.
Would that then add an extra penalty on top of the murder punishment?
Yes, it would be a further consideration in incarcerating the individual or in ensuring whatever penalty that they're due.
Right.
When it comes to hate speech, what was currently operational was the crime of criminalise, and that's Latin for injuring someone's dignity. So the likes of Penny Sparrow, the likes of Adam Katsavelos, they would have been charged under a criminalise crime, criminally. But there was no criminalization of hate speech per se. So you'd have to prove that someone's dignity has been impaired. But now, if you can show that indeed this is a hateful speech directed at a particular group because of their race and because of their sex, their gender, and so on, then someone can also be held liable for hate speech under this law. And of course, it's exactly what we had outlined in the beginning. What we're looking at preventing here is racism, incidents of racism. We're criminalizing effectively racism. We're criminalizing homophobia. We're criminalizing people who would discriminate against people because of their HIV status and they would make fun of them. Quite frankly, I saw this, I think a couple of days ago, if not 2 days ago, a very prominent politician from the opposition party making fun of someone who has autism on social media. And it was that type of conduct that I wouldn't say would criminalize that, but that's the type of behavior that then leads to a very slippery slope around how we should treat people who are very different to us, not by choice.
And it's such a difficult balance, isn't it? Because we do not want racism in our society. We do not want people who have autism or any other disability. We do not want them to feel outside of society. We're all in this together. But the criticism is, and the worry, certainly from a number of opposition parties, is that this is going to ultimately clamp down on free speech. And free speech doesn't mean speech that I find okay. It's sometimes stuff that you find deeply unpalatable and that you completely disagree with. Where is that line, and has that line now moved? Is it much more easy to clamp down on someone's right to say whatever they like in South Africa?
I think that's it's a hyper sensationalization of what we're trying to do, because you can't argue that racism is compatible with free speech, unless they're trying to say that to us, that racism is compatible with free speech. It cannot be, and we have to limit free speech if it's going to border on racism. We have to be able to limit, and that's what the Constitution in Section 36 provides for.
How is the bar more sensitive on racism under this law? That's what I suppose I'm trying to understand. Give me the difference there in terms of the criminal injuria and this new law. How does it make it easier to actually clamp down on racism?
Well, I think it just makes it quite clear that hateful speech that's based on race is criminalized, whereas before it wasn't as clear-cut.
It falls under an injury.
Yes, so it was you had to show that there was an injury to you. But now the law is quite clear Statements which are harmful, that are based on race, we're just not going to be able to tolerate that in this country. And that's also in line with international law.
I hear you. Isn't harmful, obviously physical harm is quite easy to assess, but emotional harm is a very subjective thing. That wonderful thing where people say, I apologize if you were hurt.
Yes.
And that person is saying, well, I don't think I was hurtful.
Yeah.
Isn't it going to be very difficult to argue what is harmful? I mean, under the new laws, and I'm reading from a couple of articles that the team pulled for me, hate speech will be defined as a clear intention to be harmful,
yes,
or incite harm. But that's not just physical harm. And it goes to obviously race, gender, sex, including intersex, but it goes down to belief as well. That could be quite murky territory.
It could be murky, but luckily I think the legislators were quite smart in this regard. So what they've added into the law now is the victim would then have to produce a victim impact statement and present that to the court. And that's what the court assesses. What would that look like? Much like, so this is how this particular statement made me feel. And
so what would be
this is the harm
harmful?
that I've incurred.
It made me cry. Would that be harm?
It hurt me, or it hurt my
dignity. Would that be enough to prosecute someone criminally?
That's what the court will have to decide.
It's awful and it's wrong.
But racism is not rude, and
racism is wrong.
Yes, but it's not. It's absolutely wrong. So we mustn't minimize the idea that racism or homophobia can be trivialized.
I'm with you on the race, but when it comes to belief,
well, I mean, someone can argue that they believe that homophobia is justified, and it's a biblical notion.
Those are the big ones that we're kind of familiar. But what if someone has a belief that, well, I want to identify as a sunflower, and you go, don't be ridiculous, Sally, you're not a sunflower. I go, you've heard my belief. Right, that's it. Yeah, it's hate speech against me.
The court will have to assess that, and also the NPA also would have to really look at indeed, are we dealing with someone's dignity being completely impaired? But of course, we're not saying that it's going to be free for all. Right? Now, every statement that hurts everyone would now be classified as hate speech.
But it's calling out the things that are very obviously wrong.
Precisely, very obviously wrong,
like the racism.
And discrimination, particularly on the grounds of belief. So if you say you identify as a sunflower and you say we're not going to employ you because we don't like sunflowers, then maybe that's a bit problematic.
Okay. I have to ask you about comedians. They are known to be insulting. And very often a comedian will say we insult everyone equally.
Yes.
Is this going to clamp down on stand-up comedy?
Not at all. So the Constitution in Section 16 is quite clear that artistic expressions cannot be limited. And I mean, when people make jokes, it's fair game. We have great satirists in this country who really take the mickey out of everyone, and we understand that that's satire.
We have seen comedians apologizing for causing offence, though.
And that's within their right, I think.
So isn't it within my right under this new law to say you've offended me?
But it's not an express hate crime. And so it's not about being offended, and that's the point. It's about whether there's an express hatred that is being portrayed here. And of course we are going to make offensive statements.
I thought it was more about, but didn't you say it's about whether that person feels harmed?
Harmed, and that harmed is then also qualified by hatred. So it's not just a general harm. Yes, it's hatred and harmfulness going together. That's why it's a hate speech, it's hate crime. So it's not just a crime, but it's motivated by particular hatred for a specific group, or hatred for a specific individual based on particular characteristics. And those characteristics are what you've outlined there. So it has to be qualified in that way.
All right, so the President still has to sign off. That, I would imagine, is going to happen soon. Do you have a time frame?
No, we don't have a time frame. Those are things that we can't put to a time frame, but we do believe that now that the National Assembly has done their work and they've passed the bill, it would find its way to the President's desk, and definitely we will have a law that we need to implement. And I think what's most important is that I think all South Africans need to rally behind laws that prohibit the past that we come from, and really implement the Constitution. I think these laws are in line and straight in kilter with the Constitution that we have today, and it gives true expression to the constitutional democracy that we were trying to build. So we hope that society will rally behind it, and of course, where the concerns, with our concerns, people may want to take that up whatever avenues they think is relevant. But I think that ship has sailed. This bill has been thoroughly consulted. And like you said, it's been in the making for 5 years due to litigation. Ultimately, it's already
been tested
an implementation of a number of constitutional court judgments to find expression through this bill. So we are confident it will pass muster.
For coming into studio to tell us about it. Let's hope it contributes to a better society and a less hateful society.